Welcome to the Indigenous Conservation Alliance podcast, where Native voices lead the conversation on conservation, stewardship, and our responsibilities to the lands and waters that sustain us. Across Indian country, our homelands carry stories of relationship, resilience, and knowledge passed down through generations of people who live with the land and listen to what it teaches. Through conversations with tribal producers, ranchers, conservation leaders, elders, and community partners, we share the teachings and experience that continue to guide how we care for the water, the land, and the living systems that surround us. Together across Indian country, we recognize the spirit carried in our waters, our homelands, and our ecosystems, and we honor our role as caretakers for those yet to come. Welcome back to the Indian Nations Conservation Alliance Traditional Ecological Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Emmett Dustybull. Today I'm honored to sit down with someone I've had the privilege of working alongside through Blackfeet ECO Knowledge. His name is Yazz, Curtis Ray Yazzie. He's dedicated his time to serving our people as a shield keeper, helping strengthening the connection between culture, language, our communities, and the land. This is what it looks like when boots on the ground meets land cultural preservation and language revitalization. Yaz, it's good to have you here. Before we get into your work, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is Yaz beyond the title of a shield keeper? Tell us about where you grew up and what life was like for you as a kid.
Ah, okay, Nistunitaniku, Matumse Pi Punukamita. My first name as a child was Oxtoki, which I guess was interpreted to me as gambler. So as a young kid, it made sense that that was my name because I took a lot of risks. I was always the loudest kid, and they tried to make me go to church when I was a kid. Both my parents on uh, both their parents on each side, they were all put into boarding school. So all my grandparents being put into boarding school, it kind of like got passed down and to my parents. And I was raised by my mother when I was younger, my biological mother, and she was very, very religious. And that was kind of like it shaped a lot of my childhood. But I was just always banging my head against the having to sit there, having to say the words, having to sit there and be told all these things that to me, I think over the years started to agitate me. And the agitation really shaped a lot of my childhood as well. I ended up running away back to the reservation my to my who I call my mother, Butaki, Charlotte Newbreast. She lived in the flood house that was given to her from her grandparents, which are my great grandparents, Sam Newbreast and Agnes Ironpipe. They after the flood of '64 were displaced and given a home in town and on Moxon Flat. And I kept trying to run away when I was a kid from like 10 to 11, and I finally got to do it when I was 12. I ran away back to the reservation with my skateboard, and I got onto a payphone and I called Charlotte and I said, I'm in Great Falls, Montana. Can you pick me up? And she was shocked and amazed that I made it. And I've been living with her uh, throughout my young adult life, and she's also having traveled, back and forth as a young person all over the world. I've been able to have an anchor point with her in Moxon Flat and in that flood home. So that's kind of like a general overview of I think what could be like how I would express how my childhood went. It was a lot of trying to break free from dogma, indoctrination, which I didn't know back then that's what it was. And I just wanted to be free. And as a risk taker, I was able to take those risks and do whatever it took to get there. So,
Yeah. Growing up, we just kind of think about the people that had the biggest influence on our lives and how pivotal aspects of them that kind of shaped who we are today. When we're looking back, what teachings didn't make sense when you were young, but mean everything now?
That's a good question. Um, do it again. That's what my Butaki Charlotte would always say. She, I'd be doing whatever, taking whatever risks, jumping off a house onto a big pile of mattresses, break a bone or something, and Charlotte would say, "Well, do it again." It wasn't like, "Oh, my poor baby. Oh, are you okay?" It was never that, and I was like, "Well, do it again." Or another one she would always say is, "You play with the big boys, you're gonna get hurt." And so I had to really evaluate, self-assess, and it kind of developed over the years of discernment. Looking back, taking responsibility, I think is another key aspect of why she said that in those ways. It forced responsibility onto my own, in my own hands, which is at the end of the day the truth. The bottom line is that, well, I didn't like the outcome. I guess I'll have to reassess if I want to do it again. And then trying to trying to do things outside of my capacity, hanging out with the big dogs, the older cousins, and doing all this and that, and trying to keep up with them. It really made me have to sit there and understand myself that, like, I can't do this yet. I can't do this yet. And I'd always try. I kept trying. I kept pushing, but it really helped me be self-aware of my current limitations, so I could actually get to a point where I can, like, see where I'm at. And I think that has been really critical in my development as a person over the years, because at the end of the day, like, I know where I'm going. I have a lot of I'm very intentional, but it was because I was able to develop the ability to reflect, with a broken arm, or all these different situations that I got myself into, that now as an adult, I, in the back of my head, at the bottom of my probably subconscious, I'm like, well, I'm assessing as I'm acting. So instead of just acting without assessing.
Yeah, in those earliest moments when we're growing up, we're learning the Blackfeet culture, and like you said, tail between our legs, we go running to our moms. We don't have aunties, we have other moms. And when you think you're gonna get a pity party and a hug and a kiss, you get the get up, do it again. Well, don't be doing that. it it kind of just makes the aspect of, like, our women raised warriors, and they make us self-assess, like you're saying, make us talk about, kind of make us think twice before the things that we do, and who we are, moving forward. Because I think back in their minds, they know that they're not going to be able to be there to coddle you through the hard times, so it's really a life lesson, those earliest moments in our young days. So, like, moving forward, becoming a shield keeper, how did your journey with Blackfeet Eco Knowledge begin?
Was actually, I think, with you, Emmett, before I was a shield keeper. Us having our relationship and understanding, being on the same wavelengths in a lot of different critical topics, and having our mind and our wherewithal really honed in on the, I guess, what would you call it, like the gunny philosophy, if you could say that, or the zeitgeist, the collective consciousness of our people. I think because we've been on the same wavelengths and had a lot of conversations. I think it was you who recommended me for hire. It was my understanding, and so to be a shield keeper, I think it was through relationships, through multiple relationships, and able to cultivate, you know, comrades over the years that led to me becoming a shield keeper.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that was the beginning, but it was Tyson who approached me. He asked me if I wanted a job, and I told him straight up, I was like, I'm not a good employee. And he's like, perfect, and then I had a couple of things because I haven't had a job in like 8 years because I've been able to navigate, living in the world through my own means the things that I've built and the things that I've, cultivated and started from the ground up. But the more that he was able to just help me understand the gist of what it means to be a shield keeper, it was everything that I was already doing. So I guess I could say that like it's the path that I've already been on, and it's where I'm already headed. And so we everything just kind of aligned, and great, like, huge props to Lana and Tyson for laying the groundwork and taking all the time and effort and energy and sacrifices it takes to build something for people like us who just want to see our people prosper and see the land flourish, the ecosystem grow, and the children eat for forever. So
Yeah, I want to just for those that don't understand, I know you know what it means to be a shield keeper, and but for those that don't know, how how did they take the culture, the language, the preservation, the revitalization, and then how did they make this a job title? How what is a shield keeper? What I'm asking you, like, what is it? What does it mean to be one? What is it like when we're thinking about everything,
mm,
boots on the ground? We're thinking about how we fit into culture and language, and how we put that traditional ecological knowledge, that academic term that we kind of toss around. How do we, what does it mean for a shield keeper to put it at the front, And first, like, what is a shield keeper?
hmm one quick second. I have a word that was said to me, and it has to do with the Pikani. I guess it has to do with curiosity, but it's like sacred knowledge, and then there's levels of the knowledge that you get, and there's a Blackfeet word for that. I'll have to look through my notes here really quick. Do you know the word that I'm speaking about? It's like,
The word that's coming to mind is like gukyokes and
mm,
bumux and
bumoksin. Yeah,
transferred knowledge. Yeah,
yeah. So bumoksin.
yeah.
Yeah, I think so. My understanding is there's a Blackfeet. Well, let me take a step back. So curiosity. Everything. We all have our own inclination as Native people, as Amskapipakani, as Nitsitapi. We have our own inclination of what draws us in, what calls us. Everything that's calling us. It's about listening. It's about learning. It's about being curious. I think these are the main uh, principles that are fundamental to being a shield keeper. It's being able to listen, being able to hear that calling and hear that, feel that energy of what's drawing you in. And to answer your question, what does it mean to be a shield keeper? Having been out on the land, listening, and having been out in these places that are deemed, sacred. I believe that everywhere is sacred. There's key places that our people have gone for thousands of years, and they listened. They just sat there and they listened. And we've had a lot of, I would call them like miracles, happen while we're out on the land, where you see something like a crow will come up and will just fly and land right next to you, and he'll start talking and talking and talking and talking. But it's right at the base of Chief Mountain. And before I even knew the story, of the thunderpipe and the crow, I was sitting there with the crow at Chief Mountain while he was just sitting there talking to me. And or there's a lot of moments where like I'll just be sitting there and all these ermine will come up, pop their heads up, and then they'll just be playing together, and intermingling with one another, and you start to see and you listen, you get a glimpse of the miracle of life that we live and are immersed in, but through their eyes. I've been able to sit with beavers and watch a beaver drag a tree down into the dam that they're creating, and you see the life that they live and the energy that they, I would say, emit, or I guess you could use the word transfer. You know, that transfer of energy starts to build within your own consciousness, which then becomes your shield. Then you're able to, you hold that knowledge, you hold that perspective, you hold that intuitive connection, and you become more aware. So I would say that the shield is very much something that's transferred through your participation in the ecosystem and having that love and curiosity to keep learning more and keep wanting to see through their eyes. Um, so it, it doesn't necessarily have to mean you're holding a shield, because that is also part of it. But to do that safely, to do that with protection, to do that with, the blessings and the miracles of getting to the place where you actually escape danger. The prerequisite of that is getting that transfer of understanding through your curiosity with the vision and the sight that is granted from being out there. Um, because we moving away from nature, we get hit. We're immersed in different kinds of energy. But if at the core of your center is that eye of the the beaver Sistaki, carrying that log all the way down, that chopping it down and dragging it. He doesn't complain. He doesn't worry. He just does it, and that puts a little puts some pep in your step and makes it so me, like, I'm not complaining when it gets hard. It's just what you do. Um, so yeah, I think that's kind of a broad. I could probably go a little bit deeper into it, but that's kind of.
No, that's good. That we get in the sense of the awuta cakes. One of the biggest reasons I wanted to interview you is because, see, the awuta cakes are about boots on the ground, helping the community, preserving the culture, revitalizing the language, and then being a part of the tribal system and helping out with any which way you guys can, and actually getting out and doing the dirty work, and then taking that culture aspect and putting it back into the mainstream society where people are seeing you guys do the work, and you're openly acknowledging that, hey, we have a whole culture that's based on tens and thousands of years of knowledge. Let's use it, you
Mm.
know. And I think you covered it really good. Yeah, just kind of like keeping on that same track. Shield Keeper. How has it either continued or changed you as a man? Changed you as a community member, or continued your leadership? How has it? How has being a shield keeper? How have you seen it um, help you in any sense?
I guess from going up on grounding, it's very grounding to be able to go and go out on the land and see the miracles of everyday, not just the everyday lives of the everyday experience of, like, nature and the Sakomita peaks and them interacting with one another. It's very grounding to shut off the noise, able to go up on top of a mountain and document a sacred site, and to sit where our chiefs for thousands of years have sat and reflected and listened, followed that curiosity that led them to that mountaintop. To be there myself and to have no noise, to just see the land, and what comes up is a calmness that enables me to go into whatever situation I need to go into. Whether it's political or has to do with maybe things that are going on in the community that are not as that are pretty chaotic, or it's a sense of grounding that I'm able to keep with me, that I'm also feel peace because I know that I can go back to. I know that I may be affected, or I may be stressed, I may have some form of anxiety, but I know that that these places exist. But if I hadn't taken the effort to climb up that mountain, with the other shield keepers on our team, you know, I would have just been in the boxes. We live in boxes. A house is a box, a room is a box, a building is a box. Our shoes disconnect us from the land. All these frequencies that we're saturated with, with 5G and 6G, coming in, Wi-Fi, the algorithms, we're all in these boxes together, getting tuned, for lack of a better word, tuned to these foreign frequencies. But I get a lot of peace knowing I have gone through the experience of disconnecting to connect. You got to disconnect to reconnect. And having done it so many times, I know that I can always do that. So anything that I get into, I know that I can go back to those places. And it doesn't have to be on top of a mountain either. It could just be right here. We're sitting next to Two Medicine River, and we're just watching the same flow that we've been looking at for generations, and that brings me peace. So I guess I would have to say it's grounding, and brings me peace that I know that I can always return back to.
Yeah, beautiful landscapes around these parts. Kind of shifting into traditional ecological knowledge, it's a term that we use in academic spaces, but it might be only 20, 30 years old in the academic area, in academia or whatnot, when we were first being able to start using it, and how we can actually tap into our elders for information and then cite them as scholars. But we've been doing this for tens and thousands of years. Each Indian community throughout the United States has their language and culture that are codes of how they maintain and preserve their lands, their cultural identity, and their whole surrounding ecosystems. How they didn't handle it, they participated in the ecosystems. Thinking about TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, what does TEK mean to you?
Mm. So traditional eco knowledge, on the sense of like on the academic level of things, I think is very important. I guess I get a general sense of excitement when I hear TEK, uh, because these methodologies and these pedagogies and these paradigms that the Western world has tried to instill into the grid. We live in a grid, and the flow of the grid is the opposite of the flow of nature. Um, I've been a part of a lot of, before being a shield keeper back here in my own homelands. There's people called land defenders, water protectors, and having been a land defender, you know, being coined as a water protector, it's very, very clear how much force is applied against the natural flow of things. And it's highly funded, it's highly, regulated. There's policies, there's an entire grid system developed to dissect and extract from the flow of nature without pouring back in, without alignment. Symbiosis, is very important. Harmony, we hear about harmony, but we it's something that is foreign in a lot of places, and a lot of people are struggling. Society is struggling. Entire nations are struggling. Places like Flint, Michigan are struggling, and then you can go even higher into looking into places like Palestine. You know, these they as a water protector and a land defender for so many years, they say that we're a part of a movement. They say that we're protesters, but really, there's a movement again. There's an entire movement against us that are just trying to live in harmony and in some symbiosis with nature. The grid and all of its leadership, they're actually protesting against us. The entire grid and the entire system that we live in is one giant protest to see if they can conquer nature. And the people that are at the forefront of the academic and the developing the indigenous native Mississippi methodologies of how to understand, how to reassess and redevelop and re-articulate and reformulate and format how to align our systems with and to undo and unravel the grid so we can be in harmony. I think that those people, they're taking a lot of the protest and the force that's in the momentum of this colony that is swinging against us. They're at the forefront. So, I get a lot of excitement thinking about the people in the leadership places, like TEK or like BEK with Tyson and Lana Running Wolf. These people that are taking on that energy and that sacrifice to force and pierce through that energy to make way for something that you can say is new. It's new to this country, but it's always been the way that we've lived. So I guess that's my
Yeah,
two
no,
cents
that's
about
a
it.
really TK. It's so compounding,
Mm.
and it seems like this big world where we got to take on this fight, and you start to understand that. Okay, well, let me get in where I fit in, and let me take a breath, and let me change what I can change, and let me keep moving past the things that I can't change. Just knowing that, traditional ecological knowledge is still here. Like you said, you gave multiple examples of the fight, and it truly is becoming like that. We're starting to see these data centers pop up, and one of the first people that jump on the front lines is the opposition of it because of the use of the water, the negative use of the water, and how it's just impacting ecosystems. And really, that's what TEK is not manhandling the ecosystem that you're in and that you live in, but it's participating with it.
Mm.
It's understanding that there are, our land animals, our Suita peaks, our water people, our Spumita peaks, our sky people, and really knowing that we participate in an ecosystem, we don't control it.
Mm.
When we're still thinking about in that TEK, respectfully, how do we share? How do we respectfully share Indigenous knowledge while protecting what is sacred?
Mm. Can you speak a little bit more about that question?
Yeah, so when we're thinking about, Indigenous knowledges in the world of traditional ecological knowledge, what what does data sovereignty look like? What can be shared? What can't be shared? Are
Mm.
we creating
Okay.
something for the tribe? Are we creating something for these nonprofits to be able to use to protect the lands? Are we because one of the most important things is an ipomom. and Kakyokseni Pumo, transferred knowledge is we're not gatekeepers of that information,
Mm.
but we got to filter who gets the information.
Mm.
When we think about TEK, how do we take that mindset of our culture, Blackfeet culture, transferred knowledge, and how do we share indigenous knowledge while still protecting what is sacred?
Mm. So I've been living in Los Angeles off and on for about 10 years, and being able to go back and forth between our societies, our cultural gatherings here, like right now I just said cultural gatherings rather than this specific thing that we do. you know for me it comes down to security culture, securing, what is ours, and we have a natural inclination to protect, the most inner circles, the most inner parts of our lodges. And that's because, we have so much high regard and so much love and so much sincerity and uh, so much emotion connected to the innermost circles of you know our ways of life. And having been able to go back and forth to the city of Los Angeles, to here, to come to our meetings, to come to our sweats, to come and participate in becoming Nitsutapi, becoming, more self actualized. You know, it's very important that we distinguish general knowledge and sacred knowledge. It's very important that we assess within ourselves why we're doing this. Because going out in the world, you can see a lot of people who do it because they want to be recognized as the most knowledgeable, the most holy medicine man, and they just do it from a place of wanting to be loved, I think, and they do it from a place of wanting to feel good about themselves. But then they end up bringing a lot of people into sweats or ceremonies and things that then are not articulated or interpreted in a way that keeps them in a close proximity to the land, in a close proximity to the people who need it. Because these things aren't about just going out and looking the part. It's actually to deal with the ugliness of the world. It's actually to deal with the ugliness that, we're facing in our communities, on our reservations, the healing that needs to happen, and the healing, bringing all these different types of people with all these different types of energy and all these different types of intentions. It starts to clutter up and bring chaos into places that people need, because they are suffering. Our people have faced hundreds of years at this point of a designed deconstruction, a designed, you know, protracted war against us. And we see the effects of that on our children. We see the effects of that. I've had several brothers of mine, commit suicide. And so what we're dealing with and it is very important to us. So to bring in people who want to take the imagery, or take in the the, the outward, image of what we do, and then monetize it, capitalize on it, and then create their own platforms and create their own, organizations, just to profit and benefit for the sake of profiting and benefiting, on the premise of being, native, being, you know, a medicine man, or being, our culture is very much a culture of healing. So it's hard to be able to sit with somebody who is a very specific intent that doesn't align with ours when we're sitting next to the family of the people who are mourning and we're praying for them, or they're coming in and asking for support. So it's very important to have a clear discernment on what we're putting out there and why we're putting it out there, because people will take it. I think that's the bottom line, is like people will take what we have and then try and replicate it for their own means, for their own ends. And, having this social media, in the world that we live in now with all this content, people are looking and seeking for something that is real, but sometimes it just looks real. Sometimes it's imitating something that's real. And for those that are truly disconnected, they may get lost in that interpretation, because the world is hungry. The world is very hungry for meaning and a foundation, and they're trying to go through all of this content and through all these different you know apps, and and we're just on our phone trying to see a way through for those of us that are trying to decolonize. And for those who are disconnected, it's easy to find somebody who may sound legitimate, or who may, you know, say the right things, but are you going to get healing there truly? So I think it's important to make that distinction.
Yeah, TEK isn't separated from language. It's not separated from culture, and it's not separated from who we are as it's it to be, or even anybody that's tuning in and listening. You as a native person, finding where your roots are, who you are strongly, and understanding that once you figure out who you are as representative of your respective communities, then nobody else can tell you who you are.
Mm.
Nobody else can say this is what you do, this is what you need to do. You have a backbone, and you're able to say, no, this is who my people are, this is where we came from, this is my TEK. I'm willing to share this with you, but you're not going to extract this data, and you're not going to sell it. We're going to use it to protect our ecosystems, and we're going to use the ecosystems to help protect us and heal ourselves in the surrounding areas that we respectively come from.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important with TEK. Just in the academic sense too, kind of just wrapping it back up with this SAGM. When we think about TEK, we're not going to be asking somebody from hot environments how to survive in cold environments. And we're not going to be telling people from cold environments how to survive in hot environments, because their TEKs just don't align. Traditional ecological knowledge is such a broad concept. But then when we look at individual indigenous communities, we're able to zoom in and look at how they survive in that specific area, how they protect their knowledge, how they go about. It's just like when in Rome, you do as the Romans do. When you come to Blackfeet country, you're going to participate in Blackfeet culture.
Mm-hmm.
And just moving forward for you, Yaz, what role do you hope Blackfeet Eco Knowledge plays for the next generations to come?
Mm. On an organizational level, or just like a general effect,
In any
impact?
in any which way you want to see that, because what the next follow-up question I'm going to ask you is, how do we create more leaders, not more followers?
Okay, well, that's perfectly aligned with how I first received that question, because I will take a step back. Through my experience, I've having all of my grandparents go to being forced into boarding school, and then being forced into living in town, not out in the country where we're originally from. I legitimately had to go knock on doors, like legitimately, go to a stranger's door and knock on their doors and say, hey, do you guys do ceremony? Do you know where a sweat lodge is? And then they'd say, well, go over here, go knock on this door. And I ended up finding my way in the same way that the people who I ended up knocking on the doors found their way. You know, our community used to have like 20 bars and 20 churches, and in a small town in Montana, and they were left with whatever they could gather. And having to be the next generation to do the same thing, you know, it brought me to a lot of iterations and interpretations of Blackfeet culture that were remnants, you know, had pieces of the whole. And I think the role that Blackfeet Eco Knowledge can play is cultivating and really honing in and developing and bringing back, you know, the fullness in the entirety of our culture, which is what they are doing, and bringing the people in, you know, bringing the shield keepers in, bringing the other organizers in, bringing the leadership in, bringing the organizations and the key point people within our communities to gather all of what is left and put it all together. And Akokatsin is one of those things. It's our annual camp. I guess you can say it's like a summer solstice camp that happens around that time, where all of our sacred teachers and our sacred items and our sacred, you know, ceremonies come together as one. And having gone through the trenches of knocking on doors and, you know, finding my way into like a Cree Sundance or a Lakota Sundance or a sweat that may be part Blackfeet, part Pan Indigenous, and having had to gone through all of these different interpretations of these things that we are trying to get back to, you know, it's been a learning curve to say the least. And because I've put in the legwork and really had discernment and really wanting to get back, you know, and undo the effects of what my grandparents had to endure, you know, not being able to speak their language, not being able to have long hair, you know, having to hide their sacred items in the attic. You know, it was illegal to be, it was against the law to be, it was against the law to be Blackfeet. It was, you could go to jail, you could go to prison if you were participating in our life ways. And I've been able to get back to understanding to what limited capacity and limited, I know, only so far as I've come to know, you know, what it means to be Blackfeet, what it means to be Amskapi Bakani. And I've been able to bring, I have a little hardcore group of nephews that come with me everywhere that I go. And they don't have to knock on doors. They don't have to go be a loner in the camp. You know, it's kind of, it's like, I don't know, it's somewhat embarrassing experience having to be alone, trying to go and, you know, sit with people you don't know and trying to, you know, be a part of something that you know, you had to assert yourself into. You know, now they have multiple lodges at the camp. They all have Indian names. They all have moccasins. They all, you know, have somebody to help them understand the general, you know, understanding of what they're walking into. They don't have to go knock on doors and go through the experience that for me was very humbling, it was very much a test for me to be able to find the grit to keep showing up, you know, because these ways are difficult. And sometimes, you know, in our communities, you know, some people may be gatekeeping, people may just have not been raised, you know, fully in the Blackfeet culture, you know. And so being able to get back to Akogatsin due to the hard work of so many amazing people, going back to Mike Swims under, Jerry Potts, John Murray, now to be benefiting from the work from Tyson and Lana. I really hope that, you know, for the future generations, it's exactly what my nephews get to benefit from. That their experience is more fluid and has more ease in the sense that they have somewhere to go where it's all intact.
No, it's really humbling, your testimony. Yeah, I love that. I do. You started out by yourself. You went out, which you would call a trailblazer, knocking on doors, hungry, wanting that culture and language, hungry for it because it's no longer outlawed.
Mm,
You've gone out, and it's that basic concept that our people have been living with tens and thousands of years. Go out, get resources, and bring it back to the tribe, whether that's a buffalo or a horse or, and anything in between that they need. And that's what you did. You went out, you got resources, and you brought it right back home to your tribe. Now you got 6, 7 nephews that are diligently following you, saying, I trust you, you're giving us these amazing gifts. And now you set up these lodges for them, and you brought them into that. And that's really, really an awesome story, an awesome testament. Before we wrap up, what's one teaching or message that you'd like to leave everyone listening with today?
you got some loaded questions. So I think abroad, globally, we're able to live in we're able to reach people on a global level, and we're able to, we don't have to get on a horse and travel 2 days, 5 days, a month to get from point A to point B to make these connections, to get what we need for our tribe and for one another. I think it's important that I'm going to be traveling, throughout my life, and I think back on my experience living in Los Angeles, but being able to come home and connect and reconnect and disconnect from the grid. It's very important that we understand that what we see in the world and the effects that we are navigating, they're by design. Everything that we see with what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Iran, what's happening again in like places like Flint, Michigan. I've been I've been brutalized. I have a FBI file in my name as an eco jihadist, which is a term that they made up to coin us as terrorists for saying water is life. And it's important to know that for people right in the middle of these colonies and right in the middle of these grids, that you have to disconnect. If you feel if you feel a longing, a calling, that curiosity for more, it's important to follow that. It's important to understand that what you're immersed in and saturated in is by design. They're protesting against your natural form. They're designing and creating these ways to deconstruct and to destruct, you know, what is at the most core of your own being. So your feelings that you feel of either rage, or depression or loss or numbness, those are by design. These people from long, long connections of power, You brought up Rome earlier, which brought up a thought. Rome never fell. It just turned into the people of power just kept their power and turned it into places like, the Vatican. We all the conspiracy theorists are becoming validated, and just know that the most sacred knowledge of humanity on a global level, they call these places learning institutions, universities, but it started because there was a place called the Universe City, where all of the knowledge of all the kingdoms and communities and cultures that were conquered, they took their most sacred knowledge and turned it. They have their own ceremonies. These people who kept that knowledge and rewrote the Bible and gave you another version of the Bible, they kept the pieces that kept them in power. So if you backtrack it long enough and you fast forward it quick enough, it that's right where you're at. You're right in the middle of that. You know, they we have ceremonies, but they have their own ceremonies that they're trying to collectively deconstruct and destruct and see if they can conquer nature. They're trying to honestly see if they can conquer the human spirit and be God. And what we live in and what we see is places like Gaza, where these corporations like Google, Palantir, they're getting billions and billions of dollars to create a surveillance state. So they can read eventually they're going to try and get to a place where they read your frequency, your body's frequency. So they're going to set up more towers all over the world to disrupt your frequency. And that's that feeling that you feel. That's that feeling that you feel when you want more or you know that something's off. Follow that and it'll lead you to a river. It'll lead you to sitting with, even if it's just a small bird in your city. Follow that because that bird is connected. When you watch that water flow, it's answering a question that you have. And I think that's the gist of what TEK is, the gist of what Blackfeet ECO Knowledge is able to help cultivate is that experience. And for me, it's life changing. It's changing not just my life, but the lives of my loved ones and my tribe and my people. And I think as a human being, that's what I hope for the globe. And that's what I hope for our planet. That it's all okay. Because it can be. We just all have to get on the same page. And it starts with connecting and disconnecting from the grid. So I think that would be what I'd have to say.
No, it's a lot, and that's exactly what I was trying to cultivate when I asked you to on to the podcast. I do want to thank you, Yaz, taking the time to sit down and just discuss with me today the opportunity to work alongside you. I know firsthand the dedication you bring to this work, culture, community, stewardship, traditional ecological knowledge. Thank you for sharing your experiences, your teachings, and your heart with all of us. These conversations remind us that traditional ecological knowledge isn't simply information, it's a way of living. It's about relationships, responsibility, and carrying forward what was entrusted to us by those who came before us. To everyone listening, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Indian Nations Conservation Alliance Traditional Ecological Knowledge podcast. Keep learning, keep listening, and most importantly, keep carrying those teachings forward. We'll see you on the next episode. Kakadimuts. Thank you for listening to the Inca podcast. This program is supported through grant funding from the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, the Rural Climate Smart Initiative, and the Indigenous Grazing Lands Coalition. These efforts help support grassroots producers, tribal ranchers, and the conservation partners working to strengthen stewardship across Indian country as a whole. The views expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA. To learn more about Inca and our work, visit us online and join us for the next conversation. Thank you.